what we were saying.
I'm a little heavy.
At the end, me
180.
too. At the end of the last segment, we were talking about altered states of consciousness and substances, and I was making the case that as physical beings with a spiritual essence, all our experiences of the world and of reality are mediated through our brains, and brains have chemistry, and it's impossible to have experiences without neurochemistry, so we can't in principle, object to the notion that experiences that can perhaps be enhanced, or that it's possible to peer into different areas of reality by altering our brain chemistry, by changing the receiver wavelength of the brain. And some people, and scientific evidence is that it's around about 2% of every human population, have the ability to do this absolutely spontaneously. They can alter their state of consciousness, sometimes at will, and sometimes it just happens to them without them knowing why they're doing it. And the intriguing thing is that a brain chemical, which is also a Schedule 1 hallucinogen, is implicated in this, and that brain chemical is DMT, dimethyltryptamine, which all of us have in our bodies, even though it is a Schedule 1 drug, the consumption of which can send us to jail for many years. It's actually produced in the pineal gland, in the brain. And the suggestion is that spontaneous visionaries are people who automatically, without taking any substance, overproduce. Their pineal gland goes into a period of hyperactivity. They overproduce dimethyltryptamine, and they enter into a DMT trance and have experiences in those trance. And then we come back to the standard scientific model, which says that all such experiences must inevitably be unreal, because they are not experienced in the alert, problem-solving state of consciousness that our society so sickeningly admires above all other states of consciousness. And yet, the fact that our brains produce this chemical, dimethyltryptamine, and have done so for a very long time, tells us that it must have some function or some part in our lives. And therefore, what would be the objection in principle, since we understand that it's a natural product of the human brain, what would be the objection in principle to increasing the amount deliberately, intently, with intention, in order to see what experiences we have?
Maybe they don't want us to see this.
Well, I believe absolutely, George, that they don't want us to see. And I think that the whole very cleverly structured so-called war on drugs, which is financed with billions and billions of dollars of our own money, probably came about because of those CIA and other secret agency mind control experiments that were done in the 60s, the 50s, 60s, and early 70s, often with volunteers who didn't even know what was being done to them, who were given high-powered hallucinogens. I suspect that our masters in this society of ours learned something during those experiments that told them that if everybody had these experiences, which was becoming possible in the climate of the 60s, if everybody had these experiences, then their grip on our hearts and minds might be broken forever. And I think that it would be blown away. And I think the decision was taken very deliberately then to engage in a massive mind control exercise, which was intended to stop the average citizen from ever being able to have such experiences, which might shake their view of the whole nature of reality and pluck away their loyalty from the military-industrial state, which is what our societies basically are today. So actually, yes, I do think there is a conspiracy here. I think the CIA and other agencies learned something back in the 50s, 60s, through to the early 70s when they were doing these experiments, and I think I think it scared them, and they decided that there would be, that their grip on society would be fatally weakened if they allowed this to proceed. And the whole war on drugs, I think, comes from that. I think it's filled with lies and propaganda and misinformation, but it has become so rooted into people's patterns of thought and indeed so rooted into the language itself, such that we cannot use the word drug without coupling it with the word abuse. The notion that there might be responsible, adult, mature use of drugs is ruled out by the very notion of drug abuse, which is always connected to the word drug. And this is rather like Orwellian language in 1984, where the language itself is turned against the citizen so that it becomes impossible for the citizen to think independently because the language is being constructed by the powers that be. So I do think that there is a huge issue underlying this, which is the issue of individual freedom and individual liberty. And it always saddens and faintly horrifies me that good Republican Americans, for the most part, Republicans, I have Democrats too, but let's talk about the Republicans who passionately believe in the freedom of the individual adult and who believe in adult responsibility. Indeed, who believe in it so much that they militantly feel it is the right of every adult to own a gun, because they rightly point out that it is not the gun which is the evil thing, but it's the misuse of the gun by certain individuals, and therefore responsible individuals should not be denied the right to bear weapons. Indeed, it's protected in the American Constitution. The very same individuals who think that are also the people who most vigorously persecute drug users. Now, let's just pause and think about what is involved with, for example, the use of hallucinogens like dimethyltryptamine and LSD. This concerns the consciousness of the individual. If you consider what is a human being, what is the most important, the most significant part of the human being? Certainly not his arms and legs or his stomach or her stomach, his or her. It is the consciousness of the individual. It is our consciousness that makes us human.
It's the soul of that person.
It's the soul of that person, and yet we live in a society which tells us that it is illegal, that we are evil, depraved individuals, that we must be sent to prison, sometimes for up to 30 years, if we as adults responsibly, in the privacy of our own homes, doing no harm to others, choose to explore our own consciousness. And I think it's a Republican duty, frankly, if the Republican Party genuinely believes in the freedom of the individual, then they must protect the individual's freedom of consciousness. I'm not saying freedom of conscience, although they must protect that as well. I'm saying freedom of consciousness. And therefore, to be a true Republican, I believe it is necessary for Republicans to advocate and defend the right of adults responsibly to explore their own consciousness with plants and substances that have co-evolved with us on this planet for millions of years. And it creates an extraordinary contradiction if the Republican Party does not do that, and yet it doesn't do that because there's this knee-jerk puritanism coupled with the misinformation of the war on drugs. Now, of course, there may be a downside. There may be damage. There is, of course, a damage to guns. Many people get killed every year by guns, but the fundamental principle that responsible adults should not be restricted in that area by the state, and that they should only be punished if they then behave irresponsibly, that should also apply to consciousness-altering substances. The adult choice to explore one's own consciousness with drugs is a choice that adults should be allowed to make in a free society. Now, if those adults then go and get in someone else's face and cause that person trouble, then the state should intervene, but not before. That's my view.
In your opinion, Graham, by getting into this altered state, what does it do to the individual? What kind of information are they going to obtain?
Most often, it does healthy and positive things. Now, I'm not speaking about addictive drugs like heroin. My own view is that all drugs should be legal. I think that
I've said that too, just to get the crime rate under control.
To get the crime rate. First and foremost, if we want to get crime down, we've got to stop this unholy alliance between criminal gangs and our government, which has been engendered by the whole war on drugs. Half the crime in our society is caused by this problem, and it would go away overnight if government would simply legalize these substances and control and regulate them in the same way that we do with alcohol.
Yes.
We've had the experience. We saw it in prohibition in the United States back at the early part of the 20th century. It just doesn't work. It causes crime. Are we brain dead? Don't we realize that? It causes crime. And the war on drugs is causing half the crime in our society. The answer is not more and more draconian penalties, not more and more billions of dollars given to armed state agencies to invade the privacy of our own consciousness. The answer is to make all these substances legal and to regulate them and control them. Overnight, you would get rid of all the drug gangs. We would have no more drug crime. Overnight, you would get rid of the dangers of badly cut and prepared street drugs, which cause so many deaths. You would have quality. I do not think you would see a vast increase